indicate whether you wish to resume from a previously saved tour file or begin again.
They say that I'm unusual, but I don't think that's true. In fact, I'm just as usual as any one of you. Live from James Spielberg's back porch, it's Many Voices 2. Presented by James Spielberg and Appa Centauri. To wit,
Paul McNally,
Jason Spielberg, James Sachs, Michael Rodden, Peter Erkowitz, Scott Marshall, Scott Wesley, Mark Baldridge, Brewster Chase, and perhaps some special guest stars.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to
Produced by putting it on a piece of plywood and banging a nail through it. I think I can live with that.
I apologise for that. I think you'll find this a bit more interesting.
I believe that when John Kennedy told the world from Berlin that he was a jelly donut, what he was trying to express was the soft core of secret suffering at the center of his life. Storyline.
When I was 5 years old, I was trying to be cool, pretending I was Zorro running around my living room. Had a real whip of cake, a sort of mask to making signs of the Z. Trying to be cool. When I was 6 years old, I'm trying to be cool. I had a red crash helmet, silver space suit. I was John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Alan Shepard too. I had the right stuff, baby. I was just trying to be cool. When I was 8.
Feel yourself drifting slowly. Your body is beginning to relax. First your toes, then your feet.
What's that?
Oh, now your legs. You're drifting off into the horizon. Relaxing. You can feel the relaxation moving. Imagine yourself on a beach, waves crashing upon your body. Relax. Relax. Your mind is going deeper, 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 deeper.
Is she really going out with him?
Slag by Michael Rodden. The helicopter touched down on the tarmac, and I quickly followed suit, gathering my things from the cockpit as I moved. I hurried away, out of range of the rotors, and watched as my ride swooped into the air and headed back to sea. As the adrenaline rush wore off, I suddenly felt very tired. I strapped on my backpack and lifted my small suitcase. Turning, I scanned the Boston skyline. It was fully lit by the sun, which was heading towards the horizon of the Atlantic Ocean. Home sweet home, I thought sarcastically. Logan Airport was one of the few entry points to North America. Sure, you could get a boat and make the trip yourself, but that was about as safe as a Jew landing in Iran in the 60s. To arrive safely, you had to come in by air, since if there was anything waiting for you, you could just turn around and go back. That was the theory, anyway. Logan was deserted. I went straight to the water and, using one of the many boats moored there, rowed to the mainland. I saw my first people on the wharves, derelict sitting around a garbage can fire, probably cooking whatever they'd been able to entice out of the water that afternoon. I wondered what they'd do when there were no more garbage cans. Probably just burn the garbage, or the wharf. It seemed fitting that the only mode of transportation other than horses and feet to survive the Armageddon was Boston cabs. They just wouldn't give in to anything, even if it did pack a nuclear warhead. Of course, the cabs did sport heavily armored exterior and balloon-like tires to deal with the rotten roads. City services weren't what they used to be, especially since the city government had packed up and gone to New Hampshire several years back. Cowards. My ride was right where I'd expected he'd be. Ryan was always happy to give me a lift, since I was, after all, financing his education. "You got him?" he asked, once I'd seated myself. "Right here," I replied. Out of my backpack, I pulled several dog-eared books. Trash, mostly, but I did throw in a copy of Dante's Divine Comedy. "Don't spend them all in one place," I said as I passed the stack to him. "Yeah, right," he chuckled. Like anyone would want books these days anyway. Anyone besides him and me, that is. He started the cab and we were on our way. "Anything going on outside?" Ryan asked. "Not much," I said. "Russia and China have pretty much bombed each other back to the Stone Age. Some people think this could adversely affect the European economy, but I figure if they've made it this far, then nothing's going to crush the German mark. How about us? They going to do anything for the good old US of A? Don't bet on it. We're the half world, remember? Us and the rest of North America. South America doesn't even rate that high, I thought. They're not even interested in assessing the situation in the West. I think we can forget about hearing from anywhere past Buffalo for a while. Maybe forever." I coughed. "Unless we want to go there ourselves," I added. "Yeah, right," said Ryan. I looked out the window. The sun would set in about 45 minutes. I'd be home before then, I hoped. As I watched the blasted facades of old buildings march past, I saw a gang of teenage boys, 14, maybe 15 years old, scramble out of the shadows and scatter in 3 different directions. In seconds they had vanished again, though one of them rapped twice on the cab as he ran by. I turned away from the window and we continued the ride in silence. Not for the first time I wondered why I stayed here. And, as always, I remembered that Boston was home, ever since I was a little boy, before the war. More importantly, though, I was one of the few people in North America who was willing and able to report to the outside world on what conditions were like here. I was a writer. One of the last in the half-world, as it was called, being the fragments of what was once a first-world region. I'd written the only first-hand accounts of the 2-day war with China, which turned everything west of the Appalachians into so much junk. And I wrote regularly about the steady decay of the East Coast. I was welcomed with open arms and much fanfare and ceremony when I went to Europe, and everyone there asked me why I didn't stay in Europe. Even above the import of my writing, though, there was something else. Being an American didn't mean much in the world these days, but it meant something to me. Ryan dropped me off outside Cambridge and wished me well. "Actually," he said, "don't get yourself killed." But that's close enough these days. Cambridge is essentially a fortress, and the safest place.
For me on that bathroom floor and it was cool. When I was 10 years old, I'm trying to be cool. I was a fab-gear beetle running around in Liverpool. First I was George, then John and Paul. I didn't want to be Ringo at all, it wasn't cool. When I was 13, I'm trying to be cool. I'm a smoking cigarettes, sleeping in the nude, reading J.D. Salinger, turning up the Who. I said I'm bleaching my jeans so you could see right through they were cool. When I was 16.
I've never particularly cared about my birthday. The earliest which I can remember was a small family party in Kingston, Nova Scotia at my paternal grandparents' house. Fast forward now to 1986, my 18th birthday, a surprise party orchestrated by my parents. I arrived home after a day of work and was frightened terribly as my high school friends yelled, "Surprise!" That was probably my favorite birthday. The next year I was in the Army, on an exercise called Atlantic Barbara in nearby base Gagetown. I turned 19 and celebrated by mixing a pint of vodka with cans of pop in the mess tent. I drank alone, having no friends to speak of in my squad, and staggered back to my tent to sleep. I recall taking what seemed like 20 minutes to remove those damn boots. I assumed that I slept after that. It's one of the few blackouts I've had from drinking. All I know is that when I woke, my underwear was nowhere to be found. When I returned home a few days later, my parents had moved into town, renting a house very close to Karen's. They would soon separate. The following year, my mother and sister moved away from Woodstock on my birthday. We had a small party at the house they had been renting. I spent the rest of the summer at Karen's, sleeping in the basement with the earwigs, a senile dog, and a demented cat, all of which are dead now. That summer, I had spent writing the Road to Paradise stories for my undergraduate thesis, and preparing for my first mailing as Central Mailer, which was in September. I'd forgotten how I spent my 21st birthday until I reread History Never Repeats, which reprinted some matter from the first Rorschach Summer Fun special. I'd been thinking a lot about my family that summer, and had broken off contact with my father. I continued thinking about my great-grandfather, Jeremiah Surratt. I think it was that year that I began my habit of kissing pennies and flipping them away, sort of as a superstitious gesture. I always seem to wind up alone on my birthday now, so I still go out for a walk in the warm summer air, distributing pennies for others to find the next day. I'm not doing it to be some sort of benefactor, I just hate pennies. And there's not much to recall from recent birthdays, with the exception of watching the Perseid meteor shower 2 years ago from the balcony of our first apartment in London. I think I was listening to Meatballs as it played on the TV.
Rest assured, this conversation is happening also in heaven, he said, and lit one cigarette from another. Soon I would stand and leave the bar and drive to my girlfriend's house to find my best friend's car parked in her driveway. Storyline.
When I was 16, I'm trying to be cool. No more learner's permit, having license I can cruise. Drive my daddy's Buick, burning up that fuel. Trying to lay a Brody, I was just trying to be cool. Yeah, trying to be cool. Trying to be cool. I said I never, ever, ever want to look like no fool. I said now every single solitary time, trying to be cool. When I was 17.
All right, that seems to be working, I think. James, I don't know if you can hear me, but this is Peter Urkowitz. I'm recording this on Benjamin's little Fisher-Price recording thing, so the sound quality might not be the best. But, hello, Appa Centauri. This is your old Uncle Urk, broadcasting from the spacious confines of the Urkowitz-Fisher household. I'm here to tell you about some of my most embarrassing romantic entanglements, mostly from my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college. I'm not sure what exactly happened around then, but nothing had happened before then. I didn't have much luck at romance at all, ever in my life, until I met Gail, actually. But all this happened long before I ever met Gail. I've got not a very good memory in general for things that have happened in my life, but I do have a pretty good memory for moments of acute embarrassment. I can still remember painfully, I still grimace and my body convulses when I think back to when I was about age 7 and my family and I were eating in this diner off an interstate somewhere, and we'd eaten dinner, and the waitress came and asked if we wanted anything for dessert. And I wanted chocolate ice cream, but I didn't want to say that I wanted chocolate ice cream because, of course, all kids like chocolate, and I didn't want to admit it. So I wanted to ask the waitress, what flavors of ice cream do you have? But it came out, what flavors of chocolate do you have? And everyone laughed. The waitress started telling me all the different kinds of chocolate-flavored desserts that they had, and actually all I wanted was chocolate ice cream. That was a moment of a huge embarrassment that is still so firmly implanted on my memory that even just talking about it now, I can feel my spine clenching up. Anyway, quite a number of...
Cambridge is essentially a fortress and the safest place in the city to live. This was because of Esteban Romero, El Gato Grande. He and his gang had imposed peace on the city, the Pax Romero I like to call it, a few years after the war, and kept it with an iron hand. Fortunately, Esteban liked having me around because, he said, I was the only person he knew whom he could trust not to break the peace. In return, he gave me a safe place to call home. Not coincidentally, for my purposes, it was a safe place in striking distance of all the wonders that had been Harvard University. Esteban met me on the other side of the main gate. El Gato Grande was a small, thin man in his 70s. After the hugs, the my friends, and other pleasantries, he walked with me to my apartment. He asked about the outside, and I told him what little I had to say, not much more than I told Ryan. He shook his head and clucked his teeth, but we both knew this was no surprise. He told me that things had been quiet in town during the 2 months I'd been gone, and thanked me for the wine I'd sent. My apartment was an old brownstone, by which I mean it was the whole building. I mostly lived in the upper floors, but it turned the basement into a safe house. You never know, after all. I pulled out my key, a large, almost comical piece of metal, unlocked the steel door, and pushed it open. It groaned at the stress. Esteban put his hand on my arm. There is something I must tell you, he said. Let us go inside. We stepped into the hall. I lit one of the old wick and fuel lamps I mounted on the wall and pushed the door shut. What's up? I asked. My spies tell me there are people looking for you, he said. His face flickered with the flame. For me? Who would be looking for me? Europeans? No Europeans. Americans. America? I scratched my beard and then widened my eyes. Oh no, don't tell me. Yes. Janine has come back to Boston, and the girl is with her. Of course, I groaned. Where else would she be? Wait, he said, gripping my arm again. There is more. Janine does not concern me. More fool you, I said. Esteban smiled and continued. A young man is also looking for you, a man from the West. He looked at me. He calls himself Eric. He says he is your son. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating, although it was late March. I lit a candle and put on my glasses and robe. It was dead quiet. I looked out the window at the street below. The mostly full moon made the pocked pavement glow with a bluish hue. There was no one in sight. Of course not. It was after El Gato's curfew. I slumped against the windowsill, hung my head, and sighed. After a few seconds of self-pity, I rose and picked up the candle. I went down to the basement. To get there, I had to open another steel door. Like I said, you never know. I locked it behind me.
When I was 17, I'm trying to be cool. Jumped into a bed with this girl I hardly knew. We went all the way in a minute or two. We did not fall in love, 'cause we were trying to be cool. When I was 18, I'm trying to be cool, I'm trying to grow a beard. At my high school, they said I had to shave, I was breaking their rules. Trying to look like Jesus Christ, I was trying to be.
I had a blue balloon which I tied to my finger and flaunted like a diamond ring. The string stretched and slipped from my finger. I watched it fly away, crying, too upset to remember the story I'd been told about balloons released, flying wishes to God. I was too upset to wish anyway, and if I'd really had one wish, it would have been for my balloon back. The oldest prayer, the original one. Oh God, make it not be so. Storyline.
There goes Mighty Casey, our pastime's famous goat. We all recall how his career struck out its final note. Now he's down in Double-A, teaching prospects how to hit. He wishes this were yesterday, and that he could conquer it. Things are different in the show since the days when Casey played. He watches rookies come and go, signed for more than he got paid. Meanwhile, down in Washington, senators prepare to bust the money men whose inaction cost their clause of antitrust. The veterans play a second game of contracts and free agency, cashing in on fading fame while Casey treats their injuries. And so, should Casey see today a rookie take a mighty swing that misses to the fans' dismay, he smiles and doesn't say a thing.
I asked Anne to a couple of things, and we actually went to a concert together. This was 1986. It was a Psychedelic Furs concert, if you remember them. That was a pretty good concert. During that concert, I went so far as to hold Anne's hand, something that was completely meaningless, and went no farther than that. I believe that I had actually read a book. There used to be a bunch of how-to books written around that time, sort of like the Yuppie Handbook, or the WASP Handbook. There was one called the How to Be a Teenager, I believe, and it listed somewhere in there a number of steps to go through in a date that would lead to closer intimacy on teenage terms, and holding hands was one of those steps when you're watching a movie or a concert or something. However, it didn't work out in real life. Anne and I remained friends, lucky for me.
19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Well, now I'm 30-something and I'm trying to be cool. I got a wife, got a house, got a baby boy too. I'm gonna sit him down in my living room, and you know what I'm gonna do? I'll tell him how to be. Espacito. Oh, oh, yeah, C-O-O-L, I say cool.
In one of the rear rooms was a collection the likes of which might not have existed anywhere else within 3,000 miles. I was one of the few privileged enough to keep personal memorabilia. I pulled out the book I wanted and thumbed through it. At the front were photos of my mom and dad and my sisters. I skipped past those until I came to Anna. The first photo of her in the album was signed simply, "To Mark, my love, Anna." She was pale and thin, almost wayfish, and had a bright blonde bob of hair. We'd gotten married not long after I finished college, and moved to D.C. where I became a reporter. Our son Eric had been born when I was 27. Anna had filed for divorce 6 months after his birth and moved with Eric to the West Coast. 3 years later, the war hit. I never heard from either of them again. I pulled out the last photo I had of Eric and leaned it against the wall atop one of the boxes. Then I flipped forward through the album until I came to Janine. Janine was heavier than Anna. She was 6 inches shorter, and she was black. I'd met her 5 years after the war, when I'd been in New York. Contact with the outside world had ceased, and I'd sunk into the deepest funk of my life, which was saying something. Janine had been struggling all her life to get out of the ghetto, but the war pretty much rendered that moot. She was 21 when I met her, and, like me, felt down and out. I guess it was a case of misery loves company. To say we got involved is an understatement. Lost our minds together for a year is more like it. There's no birth control in post-war America, so of course she became pregnant. I didn't want to deal with it. And Janine soon decided that she had no use for me. After 2 embittered months, I headed back to Boston, and Janine vanished from my life. I'd only seen her once since then, 6 years later, with her daughter. It was a disaster, and I think she would have tried to kill me if Esteban hadn't stepped in. I either nearly lost his trust that time or gained it completely, but we've never talked about it since. I held the photo of Eric next to the one of Janine. My past sins were returning to me. The son I'd hardly known and had never tried to find after the war. But the route to the west was impassable, wasn't it? And the woman and the daughter I'd cut adrift. But it was her decision too, wasn't it? And why was Janine coming back after 10 years, I wondered. It looked like I was in for one hell of a 50th birthday. I sighed and put the pictures back in the album, and the album back in its box. Then I went upstairs and went back to bed. And this story, Slag, I hope to expand substantially in the future, probably into a series of chapters, which may eventually turn into a novel. But I don't plan to do that until Many Voices 2 appears. But hopefully this gives people in the APA a taste of what I have in mind, and gets them interested in what I hope to do with it.
At this point, the audio for Many Voices 2 violated YouTube copyright restrictions, and they basically banned the video that had the audio on it. So I'm afraid you cannot hear the original audio. In it, I read a story called The Red Ball, which is part of what I think of as the geometry series of stories I wrote. They are allegorical stories in which I made observations about people I knew, who I knew would be reading the stories, that I did not want to confront them with. There were things that these people thought that weren't quite right. And I did not want to confront them. I did not want to make them feel bad, but I did want to express myself, and this was the way of doing it without actually hurting their feelings or them even figuring out I was talking about them. My father enjoyed reading these stories very much, and considering that he never approved of any damn thing I ever did, that means a lot to me. Anyway, I'm going to try to perform the story now. This is my 4th attempt, and let's see how it goes. The story is called The Red Ball. Once upon a time there was a red ball. The red ball was very pleased with herself. Wherever the red ball went, she would prove over and over that she was never, ever wrong. One day the red ball met a blue ball. "Excuse me," the blue ball said politely. "Can you tell me why I'm blue?" "Well," the red ball sniffed, "something must be wrong with you." "Oh," the blue ball said, and then rolled off to be part of a video project. Satisfied, the red ball continued on her way. After a while, the red ball came upon another ball. This ball was busy trying to make a point on its top. "What are you doing?" asked the red ball. "I do be the pointiest triangle there be," the very slightly pointy ball said. Hello, the red ball said. Earth to crazy ball with the almost pointy head. You're a ball, not a triangle. I do be the pointiest triangle there be, the very slightly pointed ball said. Hello, the red ball said. Earth to crazy ball with the almost pointy head. You're a ball, not a triangle. I do be a triangle, the crazy ball with the almost pointy head screamed. You're a ball, the red ball said. I do be the meanest, baddest triangle there be, the other ball maintained. Ain't no question about it. You're a ball, the red ball said again. If'n you says that again, the crazy ball said, I'm going to have to whip your behind. The red ball sighed. You're a ball. The crazy ball may have been a few degrees short of a 360-degree angle, but he wasn't a wimp. The crazy ball thoroughly whipped the behind of the red ball and then clunked off on his way. The red ball spent a while rolling around in pain, saying, ouchie, ouchie, ouchie. Eventually she felt better and rolled on her way. Halfway up a path through a small forest, the red ball came upon a black square who was blocking the path. Hola, said the black square. I am the black square. Yeah, the red ball said. Can you get out of the way, fatty? You're blocking the path. The black ball was miffed. I am not fat, the black square said. I am slender disadvantaged. The red ball laughed. Come off it, fatty. You're a big, bad fatso of a black square. I am not, the black ball said. I'm slightly lacking in thinness, perhaps. No, you're not, the red ball said. You are fat, 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 fat. F-A-T, fat. You're what Weird Al was singing about in that song. When you sit around the house, you sit around the house. I bet you eat one meal a day. That's right. You start in the morning and finish at night. You're so fat you make butter look like diet food. By now the black square was trembling with suppressed rage. Why are you being so nasty to me, a total stranger? The black square asked. I'm not being nasty, the red ball replied. I'm merely being honest. I think, the black square replied, that you mistake honesty for rude and thoughtless self-righteousness. And I think, the red ball replied, that you mistake a 24-pack of Twinkies for lunch. Now get out of the way, fatty. The black square sighed and moved out of the way. The red ball rolled smugly on. If the red ball had bothered to ask, the black square would have let her know that he was guarding a bottomless pit. As it was, the red ball rolled right into the bottomless pit and was never seen by man or geometry again. By James Spielberg, August 7th, 1994. And now back to our regular programming.
Anne was already going out with a very nice guy named Dave, but somehow I wasn't aware that they were going out. At one point, Anne and Dave asked me to go with them to this coffee house out in the Chicago suburbs. Coffee houses are a big thing in Chicago. I don't know if you all have them in your parts of the country, but it's basically people get together and sing and perform on stage. There's a small cover charge. It's kind of a nice thing. But even though it was clear that Anne and Dave were already going to this together, I somehow got the false idea that Anne was asking me on a date. which was obviously untrue. At the coffee house, at one point, some musicians were playing music, and I asked Anne if she wanted to dance. And she said no. And I kind of got up from the table in a huff and stormed over to get some hot chocolate or coffee from the coffee bar. When I got back, she asked did you storm off because I didn't want to dance with you? And I said, no, of course not. On the way back from the coffee house, it finally hit me that Anne and Dave were actually going out. And I felt pretty stupid after that.
Are we there yet? I'm tired, I'm hungry. How far? My nose is snotty, need to move my body. Gotta use the potty, better stop the car.
Stop it! No, you stop it.
I can't, you both just run it.
Well, he started it.
Oh, yeah, I'm really sure,
Nuh-uh. It's your fault.
No, it's not. Your leg is in my spot.
Jacko, you be quiet once that goes for you too, that.
Is this Brewster Chase? Is this the Chase residence? I haven't heard.
The other thing I was thinking about was Santa Fe. You remember I went to St. John's College in Santa Fe. And I was just thinking about how nice it would be to go back there again. It's a really great place. Last was there in, I guess, 1988 or 89 when I was at St. John's College. And what makes it so special is just the architecture, just the style, just the way of life that people live there. It's unique. It's very much not like a place in the United States. It's like a different part of the United States. It's one of those places that's kind of a reminder of how big our country is. Of course, I know it's big. I mean, I think of people who live in the East Coast or the South as being very different from people who live in the West Coast. Even people who live in Seattle as being different from people who live in California. There's just a certain attitude difference, different accents, different priorities maybe. But Santa Fe just seemed to be a different tempo. People talked in their own unique accents, their unique local colloquialisms. Like instead of saying, will that be all, they said, what else? When you ordered something or was placing an order or something. And that was very off-putting at first. What else? Like, no, all I want is some fries. Instead of, will that be all? You don't even think about it. And there's those beautiful adobe houses set in the midst of this red clay sand. Instead of dirt there, because I guess they don't have dirt there for whatever reason. And it made me think about driving out to Santa Fe with my dad before I started at St. John's College. I was probably about 17 at the time. And how much fun that was, you know? Made me appreciate my dad. My dad's a pretty neat person. He's been around for a while, done a lot of fun stuff. Done a lot of interesting stuff. He's a genius with money. He's basically living on his savings at the age of 58 or so. But that drive with my dad from California through to Santa Fe, probably about 24-hour drive altogether, 4 days together in the car both ways. Probably didn't talk very much in all that time. But it was fun, It was a special thing. It made me, when I think about things like that, and I start to question my own parenting ability sometimes, And my parenting, of course, it is pretty different dealing with a 17-year-old, dealing with a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. But it also makes me think, things always do work out well. If it's true that you follow in your parents' footsteps, and I'll probably follow in my dad's footsteps, and, I'll do okay with my kids.
After a while, the news came on, and she watched that. The sun went down behind unopened curtains, and she watched on. She couldn't have told what she watched as night came on. She tried to think of nothing, imagine nothing, but she couldn't. Or if she could, she simply skipped those parts, blipped them over, empty moments, thinking of nothing, unmarked roads. At the end of each of them, she reappeared herself in an unknown room, wrapped in bedsheets, smoking. Storyline.
Lately, I've fallen in love with Audrey Hepburn. It began, I suppose, because I'm a sucker for a pretty face. Her charm and grace on screen is riveting. Sadly, she died last year, but I'm enjoying my discovery of her work.
Excuse me.
Hi, I just wanted to tell you how much I love you and how wonderful you are and how I can hardly wait till 6 o'clock to get in the car.
Mary, oh Mary, with your hair so red. Mary, oh Mary, this is what you said. You said that'd be a bad thing. Me and me kissing. Mary, oh Mary, with your lips so pink. Mary, my Mary, tell me what did you think?
Princess of Chaos.
Hello.
He hadn't
Let me
thought of
first
her
introduce
in
myself.
the almost 4 years since he had written her a Dear Mary letter. It had been a hard letter to write because the weekend they had spent together had been one of the happiest times he'd ever spent. Now he was married with a child and another one on the way, and he was happy. But unresolved issues would sometimes come to him. He didn't often sleep more than 6 or 7 hours a night, and when he did sleep 10 or 11 or 12 hours a night, his subconscious would pester him with dreams about people he used to know, people for whom he had unresolved feelings. One night, he dreamt about her. He thought of her as his little princess of chaos. That's a long story. Basically, he'd known her for years and years and years and years, and had had a crush on her the entire time. And in one of his favorite books, The Courts of Chaos by Roger Selazny, there's suddenly an odd little reference at the end of the book. The hero, Corwin, is mentally saying goodbye to everybody he ever knew or cared about. And he's saying goodbye to this woman that he'd had an affair with. And suddenly, after her being mentioned by her real name several hundred times before in the series, he called her by the same name as the name of the Dear Mary letter recipient. And said something along the lines of, blah, 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 voulez-vous coucher avec moi, my little princess of chaos? Well, it was not meant to be. And this always freaked him out, that Roger Selazny had put this reference in, which just happened to jibe so exactly with his life and experience. In any case, he slept 12 hours one night and had a long dream in which he and the little princess of chaos got together in a never fantasy land in which he'd never been married, and such things were still possible. And it wasn't a romantic dream, although their relationship had been very romantic in many ways. It was just a dream in which they sort of hung around and had fun in a city that doesn't really exist, and just enjoyed each other's company. And he awoke with a terrible feeling of missing her friendship. Well, he thought, gee, I know I haven't written to her in a long time, since that Dear Mary letter. Let me sit down and try to compose a letter in which I tell her that I miss her friendship and nothing else. You know, no romantic overtones. I'm happily married now. I've got kids. You know, I don't need any disruption to that. But I do miss her friendship and would like to reestablish it. So I sat down at his computer and in Microsoft Word wrote her a letter. It took him several tries before he got anything near something that he could live with. And what he wrote was, Dear Princess of Chaos, I hope you're well. I hope you're well. I hope you're well. I miss your friendship. I hope you're well. And he signed it with love. He probably forgot about writing the letter. And when he got a reply 4 months later, he was very surprised. He stood at the front porch, in front of the mailbox, recognized the handwriting that he'd seen so many times before, tore open the envelope, and inside there was a letter. And it read, Go to hell, go to hell, go to hell. I don't go to hell. He smiled quietly to himself. That's not bad considering I just made that up off the top of my head, is it? I'm quite happy with that.
I'm not so much looking forward to fatherhood as I am to being a grandfather, watching my children's children exhibit the mannerisms of a dozen bloodlines past. I look forward to complaining about how much better things were when I was their age and telling them stories about their ancestors. I look forward to a time when people have to put up with me.
What did Buddha say to the hot dog man? I hate it when she does this. We spent last night in a bed as cold as dead embers, and this morning I'm supposed to answer her damned riddles, as if she could make me laugh, as if making me laugh would solve anything. I stare at her while my coffee grows cold and the cigarette burns to nothing between us. I give up, I say. What? Make me one with everything, she says, and grins that demented grin, and I try hard not to laugh just this once. Storyline. James, this is Mark, of course, and I hate the fact that your machine doesn't let me talk any longer, but I wanted these to sound like they came over the phone. Scott, Wesley and I will be sending you a tape, but we won't be able to send it until Friday the 31st, so if that's too late for you, then you'll just get an amusing little tape in the mail, and if it's not, then you can use it. That's it. Oh, I have a little bone to pick with you.
Actually, I could tell you a little story. A little bedtime story. Once upon a time, there was a little trombone wandering through his town, which was made up of larger trombones. And the larger trombones decided that he wasn't being one of the crowd. So they kicked him out. They threw him into the forest, where he wandered for days and days, in a daze. And while he was wandering through this forest, suddenly an orchestra appeared out of the blue, or the brown. This orchestra scared him so much that he ran in the opposite direction, not knowing what it was, except that it made these whining sounds like catgut. So he ran. He ran out of the forest eventually. And when he emerged from the forest, he realized that he was much larger than when he had gone in. This really pissed him off. And he wandered around the outskirts of the forest, trying to find the other side, which is where his village was. But where he thought his village was, didn't turn out to be his village. It was like his village. I mean, the buildings were there, except that there were cows everywhere. And they were chewing up the huts where the trombones used to live. This ends part 1 of my story. Part 2 will be continued next week.
But the thing about Appa Centauri that's so great is that, we do it for free and for fun. And, like I said, we can put in just about anything we want to do. I don't think there's anything better than that. I don't care about money. I tell people that at work.
The History of Appa Centauri Part 10 was actually written shortly after I moved to London. It took me more than 6 months to do the illustrations. Not because I was trying hard, but because I am so lazy. It was a fun experimental zine, but I'm a bit dismayed by the fact that people seem to like it so much. Its only particular inspiration is the old history of AC chapters. And finally comes the one you haven't seen yet, Ruins Among the Life, Part 2, Relays. It'll appear in AC 95. Relays has been percolating in my mind for 3 or 4 years. I remember working on it initially when I was living in Fredericton, which was over 3 years ago. Originally, I figured I would continue the detective story from the first part, ignoring the strange continuity which has risen from the series of dream zines and other people's work. But recently, I've had some good ideas for incorporating some of that newer material. I've been writing bits of it recently, and I'm liking it so far.
Getting into that mindset of not wanting to meet anyone or romance anyone, I met Gail and we struck up a relationship that blossomed by the end of the summer into something more. Although even that, if Gail hadn't incidentally moved to New York City right after that, so that we were close together during the next year, probably we would never have gotten together either, really, in something more permanent. I guess that it's funny how things like that can happen when you're not looking for them or trying to run away from them.
Anyway, this is I hope you can hear it. By Appa Centauri and James Spielberg. May 12th, 1995. Goodbye, 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 goodbye.